Hey guys, Will here. So welcome to part 2 of our review series on the Fanatec CSL DD. So today we're going to be taking a look at the driving experience, software configuration, and a lot of the little details that we couldn't cover in our original review of the pre-production samples. So the previous video, we took a look at the hardware in detail. We did a bit of a, I guess, teardown as well, showed you the internal workings, covered things like dimensions. So if you haven't seen that video already, definitely check that one out. And of course, I would encourage you to watch our pre-production review video as well, where we talked a lot about motor characteristics, how the internal workings of this base actually function. Now, what I wanted to start this video off by saying, which I'm sure is the biggest question a lot of you guys will have, is the driving experience with the production model is exactly the same as it was with the pre-production, which I'm really happy about because I was a little bit worried that I might have to eat a few words from that original video, but that hasn't turned out to be the case at all. So all of you guys that based your pre-order decisions off that original video, rest easy. The driving experience with the production is exactly the same, so that's really great. But nonetheless, there are a lot of things that we do still need to cover. There are a few things that we couldn't cover in the original video as well. Things like the interface between the wheel and the base, the quick release. You'll remember in the original video, we had a wheel specifically supplied with a modified quick release as well, and the stem that was on the wheelbase was pre-production too. So all those limitations have been lifted now. We can show you things like flexing the quick release. We can show you different wheels, different weighted wheels as well, and really dive in deeper and unpack a couple of those things that we couldn't cover in the original video. So let's dive in. Okay, so let's start off by talking about quick releases. Now, one of the things that I do really like about the stem that we have on the CSL DD is it's a little bit longer than the likes of the Club Sport Wheelbase 2.5 and the CSL Elite, about the same as what we have with the DD1 and DD2. And what that allows you to do is have a big enough gap that you can actually drop a monitor in between the wheel and the base. And because the wheelbase is passively cooled as well, there's no cooling fans, you don't have to worry about blocking intakes or anything like that. And I think this is something that is going to appeal to a lot of people. If you want to see all the dimensions and all this, check out part 1 video, of course. But I just wanted to point that out because I do think that that is an important difference. Now, some people might be wondering whether that means they're going to have to make a whole bunch of adjustments to their rig to accommodate for that extra length, because obviously that's going to mean that the wheel is a little bit closer to you relative to the front of the wheelbase. But because we have T-nuts to actually mount the base to our rig, what that means is we can actually slide the base a little bit further away than we could with the Club Sport Wheelbase 2.5 and CSL Elite. And while you might not be able to get it in exactly the same position as you could with the previous bases, if you had one of those, you are going to be able to get it very close. So it's not going to be a case of you're going to have to go out and buy a new rig to accommodate this. And as we said in the original video as well, all the rigs that are solid enough to handle Club Sport Wheelbase 2.5 are also just fine to use with the CSL DD2. So don't go thinking that you're going to have to go out and fork out a whole bunch of money on an upgraded rig. As we saw in that video too, it does work quite well on a more entry-level cockpit as well. But let's talk a little bit more about the interface between our wheels and the quick release. So what we have here is the QR1 system, which is the original quick release. There is a QR2 system coming soon. We don't have any details on that just yet, but as soon as that is released, we will of course be doing a review video for you guys. But as we saw in part 1, again, the quick release is interchangeable, so we can just undo the little collar here, pop this out, pop the QR2 in, and we're good to go. But we do have a couple of different quick release mechanisms within the QR1 range, and what we have in front of us here is a McLaren GT3 V2 wheel with the glass infused plastic quick release with a locking ring like such. And then we also have a brand new fresh out of the box Formula V2.5X, which is the Xbox compatible model. And we have the metal quick release on this one. So I wanted to give you a bit of a demonstration on both. Now, we have looked at flex in quick release and how it relates to the DD1 and the DD2 in previous videos. So if you want to see that, you can reference those videos as well. And I'll put some links down in the description for you. But one of the things that I've said in reference to these two different quick releases in the past is that the amount of flex that you have is about the same between the two of them. What happens is the flex just kind of moves to a different position with each of them. So what happens is when we have the plastic glass infused quick release, we pop that on, it slides on very easily, and then we rotate the collar around into the locked position. What you can see here is there is a little bit of side-to-side movement. If I hold it like that, you can probably see a little bit better. I'm, pulling on that pretty hard, more than I would if I were driving. And you'll get to see this, of course, when we're driving in just a moment too. But you can see the actual quick release and how it interfaces with the stem is nice and solid. There's no movement there whatsoever. The flex is actually coming from the plastic interface between the quick release and the back of the wheel here. And that does feel quite solid. And while, there is a little bit of flex there, that's undeniable. it's certainly not enough that I think it's going to be a problem for anybody. And again, when I'm driving with it, I don't really notice it. So let's pop this off quickly now, and let's put the metal quick release version on. So pop this guy on. So we simply pull on the collar, slide the wheel on, push it in, and it clicks into position. Now, what you'll see with this wheel is there's still a little bit of flex there, but where that's actually coming from is the interface between the quick release and the stem. So there's no flex between the back face of the wheel and the metal quick release. But the net result is that the amount of movement is about the same between the two. And that's what we believe the QR2 system is going to resolve. So unfortunately, there is still a little bit of movement there, and that is going to ultimately boil down to the tolerances of the design of the stem and the metal quick release. So I've got probably about 15 different Fanatec wheels now, and there's slightly different amounts of flex between all of them. So you know, I think it's kind of hard to sort of say, you know, look at this flex and this is what you can expect from every single wheel, because it's simply not going to be the case. There's probably a little bit more movement in this, in fact, than I've had on some of the other wheels that I've tested, but it is there. And, you know, that's basically just down to the fundamental design. You can imagine, because we have a metal ring here, we do have these little ball bearings which kind of close in and are meant to take up a lot of that slack. But because we do have, you know, a tolerance there between the two to allow them to slide together, we're always going to have a little bit of movement there. Now, we do have the little retention screw as well, which we can put in the bottom. You can see that screws in through here. Now, Fanatec themselves say that you don't need to install that retention screw. What most people share from their own experience is that it does reduce the flex a little bit, and that's certainly been my experience in the past as well, depending on the wheel. Some wheels, it makes a noticeable difference, some it doesn't, and again, it's just down to that manufacturing tolerance. But what I would recommend is, if you are using a single wheel, keeping it on there all the time, then put the screw in. It's not going to hurt. If you're wanting to change wheels all the time, then don't worry too much about it. Again, I don't really notice that flex when I'm driving, but you know, it is what it is, and we do need to point it out for you guys. So about on par, I'd say, with the DD1, DD2. But one of the points that I want to make clear here is that you don't need to rush out and buy a metal quick release for any wheel that comes factory with the plastic one. In the case of the CSL DD, we don't need to worry about unlocking high torque mode either with the DD1 and the DD2. With the McLaren wheel, you did need to buy the metal quick release if you wanted to unlock full torque or high torque mode on the DD1 and DD2. That's not the case with the CSL DD. So my recommendation would be, don't worry about upgrading to the metal quick release if you are buying a McLaren GT3 wheel with a CSL DD. I don't think you're going to notice a significant amount of difference, and in fact, in some ways, I actually prefer this design because it does clamp down a little bit harder and it gets rid of any rattle and kind of just, you know, moves it across to being a little bit of flex in the plastic. So that's my recommendation there. What I'll do now is I'll go for a little bit of a drive and let you actually see for yourselves. On to the all-important user experience now. One of the things that's quite exciting about the CSL DD is it's the first time we get to see the new wheel property app which Fanatec have developed to make fine-tuning and settings and adjustments a little bit easier. Now, a lot of the settings that you'll see here are quite familiar from the old wheel properties app, but it is a little bit more easily presented, a little bit easier to navigate, and it does make things like upgrading your firmware a little bit simpler as well. So I've grabbed my F1 2020 wheel here, and let's plug this in and actually take you through the firmware updating process first of all, because this is something that you're going to want to do when you receive your CSL DD and your whatever wheel you're going to be using. You're going to want to make sure you download those latest drivers. We're going to assume for the context of this video that you've already done that, and then yeah, you'll plug in your wheel, you'll get up and running, and you'll update your firmware. So let's get the wheel plugged in, and you can see here we'll actually go across to the steering wheel tab on our Fanatec wheel property manager here, and you can see it's not showing any steering wheel attached. We'll plug in the wheel, click it on, and straight away you'll see a wheel pop up. Now it's detecting this as a Formula V2, I'm assuming because it's the same bootloader and firmware and everything that's inside the wheel itself. Maybe that's something that'll change with a later driver, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. But what we're going to do now is we're going to click across to firmware update. Now, depending on the firmware that's installed on your CSL DD when you receive it, you may need to update that as well. But it's going to run you through the entire process here with their new firmware manager app. So we're going to click on open on that as well. And we can see here it gives us an illustrated list of all the Fanatec hardware that it detects connected to our PC. Now we can see the wheelbase, we can see the motor firmware, which is a separate firmware inside the wheelbase itself. The button module endurance isn't connected, so it's not showing up that. The quick release firmware as well, which is the inductive coupler and wireless transceiver that's installed in the base, which we talked about a little bit in part 1 of this video series. And then of course, analog pedals, if you have those connected as well. We're running some different pedals here, so they're not showing up. But we can see here we do have a firmware update available for the wheel. Now, it's important to understand that the firmware that it's recommending you upgrade to is embedded or built into the driver that you've downloaded. So don't quote me on this, but I don't think that it's actually connecting to the internet and checking to see if there's an updated driver and firmware available. It's just making sure that the hardware you've got connected is running the firmware which matches the driver version which is installed on the PC. So you will still need to manually go in and check that you're running the latest driver. And then once you've upgraded your driver, that will in turn then upgrade the firmware on all your devices. Hopefully that makes sense. I think it does anyway. So we're going to click on update here now. We get another little prompt here. We'll click OK. And now we have our firmware flasher running here. Now, interestingly, the little vibration motors inside the wheel have kicked in as well. I'm guessing that's something that happens when it goes into bootloader mode. So that's flashing away. Update process completed. The wheel should reboot now. Yep, there we go. And then it says if we've got any other wheels we want to update at the same time, we can go ahead and do that. I've already updated all my other wheels, so I'm going to click on finished. And we've now got another prompt saying all Fanatec devices are now up to date. Fanatec Firmware Manager can be closed. So we're going to go and close that and then open up our wheel properties app again, click on firmware update, and we can see now it's showing as all of our firmware being up to date. Now, one of the things that I mentioned when we did our pre-release review was that the out-of-the-box experience wasn't fantastic. Had to do quite a bit of fine-tuning to get the wheelbase to initially feel good. Now, I'm happy to report that that does appear to have just been a pre-release thing. I think maybe there was some corrupted settings or something there, maybe from some internal testing that had taken place on that base before it was sent to me. But the out-of-the-box experience with this CSL DD, the production model, was absolutely fantastic. I did end up fine-tuning settings a little bit more, and I will do some future videos where I take you through all of my preferred settings for all the major titles. But out of the box, really, really good experience. I'd go as far as to say probably the best experience I've had with the direct drive wheelbase directly out of the box without tuning anything. So that's great for those of us who just want to get up and running as quickly as possible. So let's click on the wheelbase tab. We can see our rotation of the wheel in degrees, so we can make sure that that matches. We've got some basic adjustments here for our force feedback quality. One of the new things in this driver and software package is the addition of a standard mode for force feedback tuning in addition to the now called advanced mode, which is what we used to have. So at the moment we're sitting in standard mode. We've got basic function tests as well, and if you do click on force feedback test, it is quite violent. Not quite so much with the CSL DD, but if you've got a DD1 or DD2, we'll know what I'm talking about here. Let's just click on that quickly and you can see rattling around quite a bit there, rattling the camera as well. And then we have our wheel center calibration too. Now, when we upgrade the motor firmware or the wheelbase firmware, it will prompt us to do this automatically through the firmware manager as well. So just in general, the new software is a lot clearer in the steps that are required to get up and running. You don't have to kind of guess what to do next like you used to have to with the drivers. So it is quite a positive step forward in that sense. So let's click on wheelbase center cal now. Wheel center calibration, turn the wheel to center it and click center. So yeah, that looks about center to me. Center, and that is it. You can see now when the wheel's centered, we've got 0 degrees showing up there. So if we click across to steering wheel now, we can see again, very similar interface to what we've seen before. Again, wheel rotation in degrees. We see our hat switch there as well. Now, interestingly, the graphic that we have now does make it look like a 2-stage digital signal there, but it is still an analog signal. So don't be confused by that. We can see our adjustment for our steering angle, set to automatic, which is what we're going to want to have it for most things. Our vibration strength as well for the vibration motors if we're running a wheel that has those, and then testing of our steering wheel functions and so forth, as well as our wheel center calibration. We've got a tab for our shifter as well if we have one of those connected. And then just skipping over tuning menu, we'll come back to that in a moment, clicking on links. We've got some links to the Fanatec shop, the forums, Fanalab of course, which we will talk about in just a minute, blog, support page, and then some links to the various different Fanatec socials. Settings, we've got our shifter tab on or off, so show or hide. A little bit strange, I don't really know why they need to have that, but hey, it's there. And then our tuning menu. So as we said before, we now have a standard mode as well as an advanced mode, and we can adjust this or change between the modes on the wheel itself without even needing to go into these. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment too. But in standard mode, we've got access to our maximum steering angle, which again, in most cases, you're going to leave set to automatic. I do find sometimes in the F1 games from Codemasters, I like to move this down. Sometimes rally games as well, you might want to set it to something like 540, but otherwise, generally speaking, auto is just fine. Overall force feedback strength, our force feedback linearity mode, which is now called force feedback scale. For a direct drive wheelbase, I would recommend you set this to linear, by the way, but I will do another video where I go through all my recommended settings for each of the popular sim titles for the CSL DD over the coming weeks. So make sure you're subbed so you don't miss out on those. And then our natural damper adjustment here as well. And again, I'll explain all of these settings to you guys a little bit later. If we do hover over these settings, we do get a nice little tooltip here as well, which explains exactly what those settings do. Now, on that note, I do have a very detailed video I did quite some time ago now where I explained exactly what all of the Fanatec tuning menu options do and how they influence the force feedback inside the game. So if you do want to just learn more about how all this works so you can fine tune it yourselves, definitely check that video out. I'll link it above my head for you guys right now as well as down in the description. But if you just want copy and paste settings, what I would recommend you do is go across to the links page, click on the forum tab, and that will take you through to some recommended settings. If you want a more direct way of doing this, then you can do that through Fanalab as well, and I'll show you that a little bit later on in this video. But let's go back to our tuning menu now. And as I mentioned before, we do still have our advanced mode. Click on that now. That gives us access to our 5 different presets, which we can use to set up different cars or different sim titles. So you can switch between those profiles directly from the wheel as well. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment too. But we've got access now to all of our standard wheel settings, which we would expect to see from Fanatec. So maximum steering angle, overall force feedback strength, force feedback scale, natural damper, natural friction, natural inertia, force feedback interpolation filter, force feedback intensity, effect strength, spring effect strength, damper effect strength, and then the mode for our multi-position switches, which just determines how the analog paddles work on the back of wheels, which have those installed. And then our shock vibration strength as well for vibration motors, should we have a wheel with vibration motors installed. So in addition to the settings that we have available on the tuning menu inside the driver, as I said before, we can also adjust these in Fanalab as well as on the wheel itself. Now this is a really powerful feature because it allows you to really adjust and fine tune your settings on the fly while you're driving without having to alt tab out. Really powerful for getting your settings optimized when you're first setting up for a new wheelbase. So the way we do this has changed a little bit with the CSL DD and the latest drivers. We now have a simplified tuning menu as well as the familiar advanced ones. So to enter the simplified tuning menu, we tap on the tuning menu button. We're then presented with an adjustment for sensitivity, force feedback strength, and natural damper, and that is it. So we adjust those to our heart's content. We can simply rotate up and down. So sensitivity is the amount of steering angle relative to the wheel's physical position. Generally speaking, this is left at automatic, but again, I'll take you through all these settings in a separate video. And then once we're happy with that, we can back out again across to the next one. Once we've adjusted everything, we simply press the tuning menu button again and close it down. Now, if we want to get into the full tuning menu, which also allows us to switch between different presets, what we do is we tap on it once, tap on it again and hold it down for 3 seconds, you'll see it switches across to menu change to advanced. And we can now tab through our 5 presets. This allows us to have different settings for, say, different cars or different sims. I generally use this for switching between different sims more than cars, but really up to you again, depending on how you like to have your settings set. So we'll go to setting number 1, and we can adjust our presets in here. So again, we've got sensitivity, we've got our force feedback setting, we've got force feedback scale, we've got natural damper, we've got friction, we've got inertia, we've got interpolation filter, we've got intensity, force effect strength, spring effect strength, damper effect, vibration level indicator, and vibration strength or shock vibration. We do have a separate review video on the McLaren GT3 wheel if you're wanting to understand how that works, as well as all the other Fanatec wheels. So check those out if you're wanting to understand more about that. But yeah, really powerful feature being able to adjust these on the fly, and particularly being able to switch between different profiles, something that I do genuinely find I use quite frequently. So let's exit out of the tuning menu now, and let's take a look at Fanatec's Fanalab software. So before we go any further, I just want to quickly talk about one thing which I am a little bit, I guess, not annoyed about, but confused about, I guess would be the best way to say it. Now, I've been saying for quite some time now that I don't really understand why we have a separate software package in Fanalab. I don't really understand why the whole lot isn't just integrated together. Now, Fanalab is an optional download. You don't need to install it to get up and running, but it does give you access to a couple of key features, particularly when it comes to these V2 and V2.5 wheels. If you want to make adjustments to your LEDs and things like that, then you will need to have Fanalab installed to do that. So for me, I don't really understand why they've put effort into, creating a new wheel properties app. And while I do quite like the app, and I do think it's a positive step forward, what would have made more sense to me, and what I do hope we do see in the future, is an amalgamation between Fanalab and the wheel properties software to bring it all together so it's only one package you need to install. One of the problems I've seen quite a bit that creates quite a bit of confusion in the scene is people sometimes will download the wrong version of Fanalab to match the wrong driver. And if it was all just included in the one package and all kind of just worked together, it would make things a lot more straightforward and a lot more, I guess, intuitive. So that's one little nitpick that's, while it isn't a problem, it is something that I would like to see improved in the future. But let's jump in now. I'll show you how Fanalab works. So Fanalab is a separate piece of software which kind of sits alongside the main driver and allows us to unlock a couple of extra features which we can adjust to our personal preference. So we also have profiling here as well, which is very powerful. We can set up profiles for different games, and they do auto detect as well. So it will detect the games that you have installed on your system and automatically show them up. We can also do things like accessing the forums, the online shop, support, YouTube channel, and all their social media. So it's quite a powerful piece of software that gives us easy access to a lot of different resources, all from the one clean interface. We again have access to the tuning menu, exactly the same as we saw before inside the main driver, the tuning menu there. In addition to that though, we do have access to a couple of extra things. So dynamic force feedback, this is force feedback that's generated based off the telemetry data rather than through the direct input driver. So at the moment, this allows us to adjust our wheel damper setting relative to the vehicle's speed based on the telemetry data coming out of the game. And kind of think of it similar to the way True Force works in the Logitech ecosystem, where it's using an additional API on top of the direct input driver to actually allow more settings and more effects to be generated and controlled through the telemetry data rather than just through the direct input API. So I'm expecting we will see more things added to this list of functionality over time. I think this is quite primitive at the moment, not particularly useful, but I guess the groundwork is there for more additional functionality later on. Now we're going to skip quickly over vibration. We'll come back to that in a moment when I change out the wheel. We're going to go to LED. So this allows us to set different telemetry data which is displayed on the integrated OLED display on the wheel. Now this will depend on what kind of wheel you have installed. So if you've got one of the older 7-segment style red displays on one of the older Fanatec wheels, it does also work, but again, it's going to be limited in what you can show here. But what this is basically doing is it's allowing us to set priorities for different sets of data. So for example, right now we have our speed being shown as constant, RPM is switched off, fuel remaining is switched off, gear selection is showing as priority 1, pit limiter warning priority 2, lap number priority 3, and position priority 2 as well. And with this up on the screen now, you can see what I'm talking about. So what we're seeing here with the 3 zeros is our current speed. We're sitting in the pit, so we're not moving. When we change gear, the change is going to trigger that gear to be displayed on the screen momentarily, and then it's going to go back to our default setting of continuous speed. If we have our pit limiter on, that's going to show up on the screen as well. If we change lap numbers, that'll show up as priority 3, and changing position will show up as well. So basically, any event that takes place within the sim overrides the default setting of speed, and we can make adjustments here as well. So say we wanted to have our RPM displayed instead of speed, all we do is switch off speed, switch on RPM, and now you can see our RPM as I accelerate here is being displayed on the screen. We'll change that back to speed for now. There we go, so that's switched out. And again, you can change the priority here as well. So say you want the gear that you're in to override things like the lap number being displayed, you can make those changes. It all kind of makes sense. So let's pop this wheel off quickly now, and let's put the V2.5X on, and I'll show you a couple of extra features that are on that wheel. So we can pop that off, and again, we don't have to close out the software when we're changing the wheel. You can see here, it's just showing as not having any wheel connected. So let's plug in our V2.5. Pop that guy on, and there you go. So now if we go into our vibration tab, you can see we can enable or disable our rev limiter, our engine vibration, and suspension travel vibration, and we can adjust the strength and initial vibration settings for each of those two. Now, you can use aftermarket software like SimHub, for example, or Fanalab, I think as well has control of this. It gives you slightly more granular, slightly more fine-tuning adjustment than what we have in Fanalab. And I feel like Fanalab still has a way to go. I think there's a lot of potential here that's unrealized at the moment, but you can kind of see the direction that they're going with this. And again, the settings that are available will depend on the wheel that you've got connected as well as the sim that you run. You can see a few options here are grayed out because the telemetry data is not available in iRacing. If we open up a different sim, then some of those unlock as well. But if we go across to LED again now, you'll see in addition to the telemetry that we looked at before, which is exactly the same on this particular wheel, we now also have the ability to tune all of our RGB LEDs across the entire wheel. So pit lane indicator, we've got red at the moment. You can see we're in the pit lane, so those are lit up. Pit limiter enabled is these lit up blue. And then also the pattern that will be displayed when we reach the rev limiter. Now we can adjust those by simply clicking on them and choosing the color that we want from the little color wheel here. And we can also enable other LEDs as well around. So you can just basically fine tune this to be whatever you want. You can also set your thresholds for each of the indicators throughout the RPM range too. So if we quickly drive out of the pit lane, so our pit lane indicator's not showing up, and you can see that's actually a good example of how that works. So it's showing that we're in the pits at the moment. It's a little bit scrambled because I don't have it properly configured, but we can go through and I can show you how that all works in just a second. So let's drive out of the pit lane. Okay, there we go. So now, chuck it back in neutral, and as we rev, you can see different colors showing up on the rev gauge. As we max out, we've got that red flashing as we saw before. So we'll jump back into Fanalab again. So we can adjust each of those RPM thresholds depending on, of course, the car that we're driving. We can change the colors as well, just as we could before. We can change the threshold where it begins to flash, and then of course the interval too. And then we also have adjustments here for our flag LEDs on the two sides. So again, this will depend on the sim that you're running. We've got indicators for wheel spin, wheel lock. So you'll see this will light up white when we start to get some wheel spin. If we're locking up a wheel, so if the ABS is kicking in or we've locked up a wheel and ABS isn't enabled, that'll light up blue. When we're in the pit lane, red. When we've got the pit limiter enabled, blue, and that's what we could see kind of flashing before when we were driving through the pits. Anti-lock brakes enabled, traction control, DRS allowed, DRS active, red flag, yellow flag, blue flag, green flag, and white flag. So pretty self-explanatory here. And again, we can make adjustments to these just by simply clicking on them. Obviously the colors are limited because you don't want to have white flag being a different color, but we can choose whether we want it to be just on the one side or individual segments on both sides. Whatever you want to have, you can adjust it here to your preference. And again, this will depend on the game that you're running. Now let's just quickly unplug this wheel. I just want to change over to the button module endurance as well, just to show you the additional functions that that gives us. So I'll plug this guy in. There we go. And again, straight away, it just pops up, no hassle. Pretty much the same again in terms of the functionality, but you can see the indicators are a little bit different just to reflect what we actually have on the wheel. And again, if we jump back across into the game and rev up, you can see that's functioning exactly the same. And you'll also notice when I plugged in the button module endurance, we now also have access to the integrated telemetry module as well. So this allows us to display additional telemetry on the larger OLED display of the button module endurance. If you want to understand more about how that works, check out my review of the Porsche 911 GT3 and button module endurance, which I'll link down in the description below for you. And then last but definitely not least, we have our game profile tab. So this allows us to adjust a lot of the things that we looked at before relative to individual titles, and as you change through the different games, you'll see the presets will change here as well. So what's available again will depend on the game that you're selecting. Let's go back to iRacing for now. But we also have the ability here, importantly, to save, load, import, and export profiles too. So if you've got a friend that's created a really awesome profile that you like, they can email that to you. You can then import it in and use those settings. And that goes for force feedback as well as all the integrated telemetry, flag LEDs, and so forth. Now we also have a little button here as well for recommended force feedback settings. And if we press on that, that actually loads us directly into Fanatec's forums. And because we had iRacing selected, obviously it's taken us to their recommended iRacing settings. And I would definitely recommend when you first get up and running with your CSL DD or any other wheelbase for that matter, use these settings as a base point and then fine tune from there, because they do put a lot of effort into this. And I've always found these to be a really good starting point. So if we scroll through here, we can see the Podium DD1 as well as the Podium Racing Wheel F1 for PS4. We've got the DD2 settings, Club Sport Wheelbase V2, Club Sport Wheelbase V2.5, CSL Elite. I'm not seeing the CSL DD in here just yet, but I'm assuming that that will be added before you guys get your hands on these before they ship out of the factory. So we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, we'll definitely recommend using their recommended settings as a base point when you're starting out. And that is pretty much it. So conclusions on the CSL DD. Now look, honestly, my conclusions are the same now as they were when we did that initial review based off the pre-production sample. So nothing's changed there, as I said at the top of this video. So I wanted to sort of focus this one on all the things that we couldn't really talk about in the original video. One of those things specifically was the driving experience with larger, heavier wheels. One of the questions that we had, because we were originally only able to test with the McLaren GT3 wheel and the WRC wheel, which are both wider than a lot of other Fanatec wheels, we didn't really know how the force feedback and the strength would translate with heavier wheels. So I've done quite a bit of testing today across a range of different wheels, including larger diameter, smaller diameter, all the way up to the 320mm and notoriously quite heavy version 1 of the BMW GT2 wheel. Now, what I can say is that definitely does add some dampening to the fidelity that you feel in the force feedback. So I would definitely say if you're planning on running a more expensive, heavier wheel on the CSL DD, then you definitely are going to want to have the Boost Kit 180. I think it's definitely reinforced that point. I did find running at 5 Newton meters, it did just feel a little bit lacking. And those of you who may have upgraded your Logitech G27 to a larger diameter wheel, or somebody who may have been running, say, a big heavy Porsche 911 GT3 wheel or BMW GT2 wheel on a CSL Elite will know exactly what I'm talking about here and the kind of difference it makes to the feeling. But definitely still an excellent experience with the Boost Kit 180 using those larger wheels, and didn't run into any issues with compatibility or anything like that. Everything that we plugged into it just worked straight out of the box with no issues. But really, I think that was the only missing piece of the puzzle from our initial review of the pre-production unit. Everything else, I stand by what I said in that video 100%. Haven't noticed anything else that I think is problematic. But one thing I do want to add is that, having now had the benefit of a couple of months of hindsight, living with the pre-production CSL DD for about a month and testing it, as well as using this for a couple of days now on the rig. Yeah, absolutely impressed. Just as impressed as I was then. My feelings towards it haven't kind of diminished over time. I'm every bit as impressed now as I was then. And I do think that the CSL DD represents absolutely fantastic value for money that at the moment at least is unparalleled in the sim racing industry. So that's it for now. What we're going to do from here is put together a range of force feedback settings videos. Of course, we do have those presets which are recommended by Fanatec, which, as I said before, are a great starting point. But I'm going to take you through a little bit more detail on exactly how the settings work and how they relate to each of the popular sims and the settings that I use specifically. So I've been thinking about how to, I guess, conclude this video best. And I think the best way to say this is I'm lucky enough to have a DD1, a DD2, and a Simucube 2 Ultimate here in the studio. And you know, even having those wheelbases, I'm happy to leave the CSL DD on the rig for a little while to test it out and really kind of put it through its paces more long term. I want to do a couple of other driving styles that I'm not so familiar with, like drifting, and sort of see how it performs there. Do a bit more rally as well. Of course, we did test that out in our initial video, but we couldn't really do it with a wheel that was really suitable for rally style driving. So we're going to spend a little bit more time doing things like that as well, producing some content there. But yeah, look, the fact that I'm happy to leave this on the rig and I don't really feel like I'm missing out on anything major in doing so over wheelbases that cost many times more than what this does really speaks volumes, I think, and is probably the best endorsement that I can give this product. I really do think that it's exceptional value for money. So again, if you haven't already, do check out our original review of the pre-production unit. That does go into a lot more detail around the driving experience, motor characteristics, and all the things that we kind of skimmed over today because we didn't really need to go through them again. And do stay tuned as well. Make sure you sub so you don't miss those settings guides a little bit further on down the track. But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you do want to pick one of these up, we do have some links down in the description which go a long way to helping out the channel, as well as any other accessories that you see on the rig. And yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching as always. We'll see you again soon. Bye.